Hey, welcome. This is the Follow Through. I'm Pastor Fred, and great to have you with us. We are in a season of the church called Lent, and it's the time leading up to Easter. It's a kind of a time of preparation, a time when we look at our need for Jesus in a big way. We hopefully do that all the time, but this is kind of like, like in a business where you would do an inventory. Back when I used to work in the warehousing industry, we would have to do that once a year. We'd shut everything down and we would do a count of everything. So any mistakes that have been made, and a lot of times there were, and myself, had made some of those mistakes. And so you have to fix them. You have to kind of realize that that's reality, that you messed up. And Lent is that time for us to really take an inventory in our hearts and our souls and say, okay, man, what's really going on? And how are we supposed to deal with sin? Because sin is something I think that we often misunderstand. We think it's just being naughty. We often think of extremes like murder and stealing, and if you rob a bank or something, then you're a sinner. If you're really, awful to your family, then yeah, again, that's horrible, but that's not what, just what sin is. Sin is also like anything that doesn't glorify God, anything that doesn't flow out of my faith in Him is called sin. And so if you're checking this out, you kind of maybe wandered onto this channel and you're like, man, sin, I have no idea what that is. Quite often, it's much worse than we think, and it's a lot of little things that we would say is little, but they offend God and they don't glorify Him, and so that's what we would call that, and it's something to be dealt with. Now, we're going to get right back to the heart of sin, the beginning of where it all started, back in Genesis, back in creation. Again, if you look at Genesis 3, you see God He makes Adam and Eve. They're working in the garden, everything's great. And God says, just don't eat that one tree. Don't, right? You can eat of all the other trees, but the ones in the middle, no. Don't touch it or you're gonna die. Okay, simple command, a simple rule. There's only one of them, so life for them is enjoying time with God, enjoying all the things. Their work was a joy, I think, and just God pleasing and awesome, and then they fall. The serpent comes and says, "You're not going to die. God's not going to do that." And what happens is they disobey God, and honestly, they don't trust God. And they believe a lie that God just doesn't want you to be like Him. He doesn't want you kind of in on His insider information. And God loved them and loves us, and He wants what's best for us. And so He's not jealous like that. He's not insecure. He's God. He rules the world. He rules the universe. He's the maker of everything. And so He's not worried about somebody taking over kind of thing, but they believe the lie. They eat the fruit, right? Eve gives some to her husband. He should be a stand-up guy and say, look, I know what God said. We're not going to do this. But they both do it, right? They both eat the fruit, and we are just in a bad way. So I want to read just Genesis 3, 4, and 7, just a part of this whole story. It says, the servant said to the woman, you will not surely die. God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw the tree was good for food, and it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband, she gave some of that to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And their eyes were opened, and they knew they were naked. They sewed fig leaves together, and they made themselves loincloths. So they're hiding from God. Their guilt and shame is there. Death comes into the picture. All of it because they, again, chose to not trust God. They chose to kind of live for themselves and get what they could get. And that's been like kind of hardwired into us ever since, right? If you don't believe me, just think of just something as innocent as a little baby, right? Brand newborn, maybe a few weeks old. That newborn is centered on his or herself, hands down, right? I have 3 kids of my own, and they did not ask me if it was okay that they woke me up at 3 in the morning. No, They needed food, they needed a diaper change, whatever it is, and they will scream and yell until they get what they need. And that is their thing. When they grow up, you don't have to teach them to be selfish. You don't have to teach them to do certain things that are nice and that are God honoring. No, actually you have to teach those things. You don't have to teach them to be mean sometimes, and you don't have to teach them to say mine and no. But we really have to work on, this is what it means to share. This is what it means to love. This is what it means to be generous. In fact, it takes God's work in our lives. And that's what I want us to talk about, because when we deal with sin brings death. It is super, super serious. It's not just mistakes that we make. It's not just failures. It is those things, but it's far deeper than that, because at the root of it, it offends God. Could you imagine how God's heart must have felt when they decided to go a different way, to not choose Him and His way and enjoy the paradise that had been set up for them? And how it must have grieved Him that death had to now be part of life. It wasn't meant to be that way. Work was meant to be awesome and meant to be exciting, but now there's a curse. And it's struggle, and it's hardship, and it's difficulty, and it's death. And yet we see that God promised to send a Savior, and we right now know that Jesus was that Savior, and He is that Savior for me, for you. And so even though the truth about sin is so dark and so desperate in a lot of ways, and just feels like, oh man, how could we ever get past it? That's the point, is that we can't, but that He did. So what I want you to do is just know that you can trust Jesus. Know that He loves you, He died for you, and did all that willingly. And so as we go through kind of what sin is, how did Jesus kill sin, and how are we supposed to kill sin in our lives, that we would again realize just how good He is, and just really what our situation really is, and that is that we are saved, we are forgiven, and we are free because of God. So I pray that helps you today. If you have any questions on sin or anything else, please leave those in the comments. I would love to have a conversation about that, especially if you're struggling. I'd like to be as helpful as possible. All right, you have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow for another follow-through.